Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, this has been a long time coming, as I often say, but I'm delighted to be joined by Jonny McMurtry. Have I got that right?
You've got that right. Well done.
From coachingthecoaches.com, .net?
.net.
.net, that's right, coachingthecoaches.net. A really, really interesting blog that has a lot of quite challenging, insightful, questioning articles on it, and I've definitely been an advocate. Jonny's sent me quite a lot of articles and asked me to comment, and I've said several times, because I don't always have time to. I say, we ought to have a chat on the podcast about this, and we haven't been able to schedule it. Not least of which because you're in the other side of the world. Because despite your accent, you are based in Australia, live in Australia, even though obviously you come from Northern Ireland. Anyway, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell everybody your backstory. So over to you, Jonny.
Yeah, thanks very much. The accent's like a combination of Father Ted and Home and Away, but anyway. So, like we were talking off beforehand, so I'm originally from Northern Ireland. Primary sport was rugby union for myself. Eventually went to, like we were talking before, Cardiff Met. Tried to play rugby for a bit in Wales. Didn't eventually make it through accidents, talent, everything else in between. But the passion was always there. So I eventually did the backpacking thing, came around Australia, settled back in Australia with the job I now still have within a different industry from coaching. But again, as I said, the passion was always there. So predominantly when I came back out to Australia, or when I've settled in Australia, enjoyed a bit of coaching and rugby and things like that, and have now 3 kids, the first of which was also interested in rugby. So I was lucky enough to coach him for the predominant years, or the initial years that he started playing rugby. So yes, and that started to really pique the interest again of sports coaching, sports research, which I've now really jumped with 2 feet into. So that's really sort of my background as sport in regards to rugby and why I'm in Australia and what I'm doing and things like that. So yeah, that's now doing a bit of research with UQ. Fortunate enough to be involved with Stephen Rinn and Cliff Mallet. So we've got some real strong contacts, and like you mentioned there, who helped me look into and investigate areas in the blog that I mentioned frequently. But yeah, it's again, rugby union. It's always been my background and passion. So yeah, that's a quick fire on my background anyway. So
it seems like there's an emerging how shall I describe it? There's an emerging kind of tension, rivalry, competition emerging between Queensland University of Technology and University of Queensland. Because in the episode that's sort of just gone out with Alex Lascu. She's at QUT. I actually wrote that she was from University of Queensland in the show notes, and she got in touch with me to say, no, it's QUT, because you don't want to get those two things wrong. So what's that dynamic like? Is it quite collegiate? Is it quite open? Are you sharing across? Or is it more of a, they've done that, we've got to do something else, or whatever? Is there a bit of a healthy rivalry? How does that work?
Honestly, it's fantastic. Like, again, really fortunate to be part of what we call a SIG, a special interest group. We catch up as often as we can, have discussions via email, internet, so on and so forth, and things like that. We have Zoom meetings like we're having now, which is really supported by the likes of Cliff and Stephen. But you do have a lot of people like Ian Renshaw involved. As I say, graduates who have gone from UQ, such as Kath O'Brien, even someone who was really supportive of my study, a bloke by the name of Tristan Coulter, involved heavily in QUT as well, and things like that. It's let's call it a friendly rivalry. But yeah, they're very, very supportive, as you say. It's the Brisbane River sometimes feels like the Berlin Wall, but at the same time, it's very much for sharing and things like that as well. So
so one of the things I wanted to just sort of talk to you about to kick off with, I think starting point would be just to sort of centre in on, firstly, what was the driver to go into the research space, and then secondly, kind of what is your focus area? The
driver to go into my research area was my oldest son, as I touched on there before. So I've got a 17-year-old son who has dropped out of rugby twice, broke my soul twice, but predominantly it came back to that coach-athlete relationship. Just came back to an overzealous coach, to call it that, on a couple of times, and just a program that just wasn't in harmony with what he was chasing as a participant or an athlete, whichever way you want to look at it. I was involved at that time in what was called the Junior Gold program. So it's the elite, if you want to call it that, high performance program for age grade rugby union players within Australia. And again, I could see a disharmony. It was very rigid, regimental, prescribed, to call it that. So again, it didn't feel in tune. My big thing is, at the end of the day, kids enter into a sport because they enjoy it. They want to play. They want to experience something. They want to try and fulfill the ideas that are in their head. You know what I mean? It's not. They don't want to stand there and listen and be told what to do. They actually want to step into an experience and try and do things that they see and feel and get from, what is the rugby experience. So again, my son Jacob, we had a chat about it and had a chat with a few of his friends, and ultimately that's what came out. It just came out that as I said, the coaches weren't hearing what they wanted to do, what the game looked like. So that's when I dipped into my grad dip, which eventually became research. And I talked to UQ about it, even Rugby Australia about it, and they were actually quite supportive. They really wanted to hear. This was when a stage, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, when, especially in the 15 side of the game, the numbers were dropping horrendously in Rugby Australia. They've corrected it massively. They've introduced sevens, girl sevens, miniature games and things like that. But again, there was still felt like an element of disharmony and just a lack of coherence between the player and the coaches and the program that was being delivered. So I just wanted to create a bridge, essentially. I wanted to create a sense of understanding of, look, these kids may not be your next Wallabies, and they may not be your next Queensland Reds or Waratahs or something like that. But if you engage them in the right way, they'll be your next supporters, season members, sponsors, whatever it might be, administrators, coaches. If you engage them in the right way. So that's I wanted to try and set up a way where they could relate and talk to each other and structure their programs in a different way where they better engage the kids as a result. So.
And am I right in thinking then that before I jump into some deeper questions, so what format did the research take? Have you gone for kind of like a more wide-ranging understanding of what the participant experience is, using kind of large-scale sort of data gathering and surveys, or did you go much more qualitative and look at kind of, I guess, focus groups and that sort of stuff? What's the approach you took?
I wanted to go, that's a reasonable question. I wanted to, so the age grade I wanted to look at was, there was certainly a bridge or a gap between the transition from age grade rugby player to senior rugby player. There was a massive gap from, say, that 17 to 20-year-old player. So what I looked at was, and again, it's just predominantly because what was the access to. So by 3 or 4 years ago, there was the Super 20 program where the 5 Super Rugby franchises within Australia played a competition. They entered into a high performance competition where they played against each other for 4 or 5 games in the year and had a final. I was able to, with the support of Rugby Australia, I was able to dip into these players, the pool that was there. Initially, it was meant to be one of the franchises, but they said, can you do it across all 5? So multiplied the questioning pool by 5 straight away, which was great, on the scheme of things, but made the research and the skimming of the data, much harder. But at the same time, we were just trying to get a snapshot of what the current, what these adolescent, the early adult players were looking for within what they were trying to achieve from being involved in rugby union. We asked them the similar question. So again, it was from a formulated questionnaire from Robert Amons, who looks at the 3 levels of personality. So again, they'd stepped into a period of their personality development where they're making conscious decisions of why they're doing certain things. Right? They're making conscious decisions of why they're doing certain things and what they're trying to achieve from it. So we were trying to understand from the 17 to 20-year-old players of, all right, well, why? Why do you play rugby union? What do you do outside rugby union that also affects your decision? Things like that. And what can we do as coaches or administrators to, help you stay within the game and or keep you involved in rugby union for longer, better, for longer and things like that. So it was done predominantly via SurveyMonkey. So
right.
It was the questions were, they didn't want too many interruptions on their training program. Mm-hmm. And that just was what it was. But so I probably didn't get the deepness or level of data that I really wanted to try and achieve from it. There's probably a lot more leading questions that I wanted to try and get from it. But at the same time, it was a good scope of data that I could gather from these players. But I got it from when they were in the high performance section of the season and also when they exited. So we're trying to work out when they're in the high performance section of the season, what are they trying to achieve? Why are they involved in rugby? And when they exit and go back to club or later on in the season, did they still have that same level of enjoyment or intensity or whatever it might have been from that high performance section of the season to then.
So predominantly then the cohort that you were looking at were players who were what you might say were part of a talent pathway. So correct. They're more committed, they're more driven to improve. It's not a recreational cohort, it's definitely more of a performance driven cohort.
Yeah, for sure. That's where they were selected within the pathway, the pathway to gold, as they called it. They were identified as high performance rugby players at this stage. They had stepped into this area of pathway that they called the pathway to perform. Mm-hmm. So they were expected to. There were certain expectations on them as players, but again, that's where we were trying. Part of the questions and what I was trying to ascertain from them was, were they on the pathway to perform? Were they, is this, as you're saying, is this a stage where they were really looking to develop themselves? Were they looking to go into the next stage, or was it still this stage where they were looking for an element of companionship, friendship, enjoyment, so on and so forth? So, but yes, as you said, within the program themselves, absolutely, they were identified by the 5 playing unions at this stage, that yes, these could be potential super representatives or future Wallabies at this stage. Yeah.
And what did you find?
Interesting, as always. The predominant thing from the research was they weren't, and again, this came with some pushback from a lot of coaches involved in it. There was no interest in winning. There was no talk of winning competitions, winning flags, anything along those lines. It was an individual focus. It was very much of how they were trying to work hard, improve. How can I get better as myself, as a rugby player and as a person, which was interesting as well. A lot of they talked of companionship, but they didn't talk about per se meaningful friendships within rugby union. I guess that was part of the big thing that shocked me. They didn't talk about deep, meaningful friendships. They didn't talk about how being involved in rugby made a big impact or anything like that for them. Again, it was a very individualized focus of how they wanted to prove, work hard. They would talk to their coaches and seek that sort of affiliation and recognition from them that there was a level of improvement happening. But again, all their deep, meaningful friendships and sense of connection, and they call it spirituality, where they had a meaningful connection to someone or something else, was all identified away from rugby. So again, when they stepped into this high-performance rugby environment, it was very much trying to achieve something that they felt within themselves, and they identified within themselves. It didn't come from an extrinsic ideal or anything like that, or even coach or parental or external influence. It was how did they identify that they were going to get better. It was probably the biggest idea from that came from the results.
Were they reporting why they were involved in rugby or why they were involved in this particular pathway environment?
They were the answers they were offering me was, so they were offered, it was a very structurized question. It was, what are you typically trying to achieve within rugby union? So they would offer
their involvement in the game, full stop, not just this environment.
Yes. Yeah. So what are they typically trying to achieve in rugby union on a daily basis? Yeah. So, and that's where we found it very individualized focus. And then we asked for the same. So what are they typically trying to achieve in their daily life? So away from rugby as well.
Right. And so what you found was that in their daily life away from rugby, they were more prepared. They were talking much more about, for example, things like connections and friendships and all those sorts of things. They weren't necessarily looking to be deriving that from the rugby context.
Yes.
Okay.
They step into the sports context to be within a headspace or where they were at this time. And when they step outside it, that's when it was more generalized and ideographic, if you want to call it that, and things like that. So,
is there anything in the literature that would suggest that a cohort like this, for example, might give a different set of answers from a more recreational cohort? So, for example, one of the things that you sort of colloquially will hear is that, rugby builds these fantastic bonds and these amazing friendships. And I've seen that for my own eyes. But clearly with this cohort, that wasn't a primary driver for them, because for them, they felt that rugby was much more of a place where it was about striving to improve, a dedication, a commitment to improve, to be, yes, companionship, but really it's about this driver around the process. And they were finding their meaningful friendships were away from the sports arena. But I'm wondering whether that's specific to a group who are part of a high performance context, whereas a recreational group might say, well, actually it's part of my social life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, 100%. And that's where, again, it was the big thing that shocked me. I expected, as you said, a lot more tightness, bondness, unity, as you said, that feeling of cohesion amongst the other group, and that desire to form a bond and a collective goal and things like that.
Yeah.
But again, I guess that's where, and I had a hard look at it, and again, I really judged almost the validity of my data and things like that they got, because it really questioned upon, well, what I believed as a coach. Stepping into it, as you said, we expect these age grade players and even senior players and things like that to sort of really step in and buy into the culture and what's and their identification as a group. But at the same time, as you said, was it because it was a high performance, environment that they step into this environment going, well, I need to put myself in, to call it the shop window. Am I working for contracts? But at the same time, and this is where Amanda Bizek's work, after she was on your podcast, that I really, I went and had a good hard look at it back and things like that. I could find some real coordination and correlations with as well, because again, her work looked at 8-year-olds to 19-year-olds, and she did it male and female players and things like that. And again, it came across with the same sort of answers. It came across with, they want to step into this environment and they want high effort. They want they want that feeling that they've put as much as they can into it. They want the feeling of their own sense of self-achievement, that they're attaining goals that they've set to themselves and things like that. Again, and that's where I believe, and possibly that's where I reverted back to this Vygotskian theory of the zone of proximal development as well. At the end of the day, when they step into this high performance environment, or when they're of an age where they can choose the goals that are important to them, we should just, as an environment, step back, support, let them step onto us if they want some confirmation or understanding of how they can step onto the next level or next stage. But yeah, that's it. Sort of correlated. I did have a real hard look at my data, like you were saying. Where would the difference be? And again, the difference between the high performance setting to the social, when they step into the social element of rugby, or when they step in outside the high performance section of rugby, these answers were very much the same. They were very much the same. Probably towards the latter stage of the season, it was more about them actually trying to reconfirm what they'd learned in that high performance section. So in the high performance section, they had a lot of affiliation where they used the coach as, they call it that, they used the coach as a resource. So again, they were trying to talk to the coach, understand what was expected of them, and again, trying to hammer home what was they were there to achieve in the high performance setting. There was considerably less of that when it went to the latter stage of the season, when they stepped into the club stage and element of it. But again, the correlations and the sort of grading of the strivings, or what they were typically trying to achieve, was very similar.
And yeah, I mean, as you were talking earlier on, it definitely resonated with me that it sounded to me like you'd had some similar findings to Amanda's work, and yeah, so it's quite good actually when separate pieces of work kind of have similar outcomes, doesn't it? Because it becomes a little bit more confirmatory.
It was good and soul destroying, because again, it was at the same time I was looking at it going, well, this, as you said, this doesn't make sense. And again, I was trying to work out, why it didn't make sense. I was trying to work out, well, how have these come about, and is it the environment, is it certain things? But as you said, then to stumble across, Bizek's work and say, well, actually, this is why kids said, this is why they step into this high performance or sporting atmosphere. You go, well, that correlates and that makes sense. So yeah, it was good to see something like that as well and draw upon. So,
just one thing at the start, you were sort of saying about how you've got this particular cohort. You were looking at the transition between age grade and senior rugby, and one of the things that you were looking in, it's a particular interest because I was working on this myself when I was at the RFU. England Rugby, which was this idea that there was an assumption that when kids went into the pathway and they were part of an academy program, if they were released from the academy program, they would drop out. And it was like a common held belief, right? And it you hear lots and lots of policymakers, or at least kind of volunteer decision makers or representatives, constantly reaffirming this narrative. Now, when we looked into it, we found that the dropout rates weren't actually that high, but obviously there was a number, and so actually any dropout really is not what we want. But what we found was that, so the assumption was that they get sent into this performance pathway, they get sort of fed a dream, they're then, those dreams are dashed, and it destroys their motivation for being part of the sport, and therefore, this whole system needs to change, because all we're doing is setting up these kids to fail, and it means we get huge levels of dropout, and all these good players are lost to the sport. And it's usually based on the anecdotal experience of one individual who, and then it's, and it'd be related to someone's club. So you'll have somebody who's part of a club, this individual will be part of the pathway, the club will have high hopes for this individual. That individual comes back from this pathway having not made it to the next stage, and then essentially loses motivation and stops. And the assumption being is it's the pathway that's the problem. So when we looked into that as well, what we found was, I'm not saying this is universal, but in general, the England Rugby pathway, which is predominantly driven by the professional clubs, they took a extremely holistic approach and committed approach to their duty of care over these athletes, and they were very much committed to ensuring that they have the best possible experience, and the transition out, if you like, is managed in as an effective way as possible. One of the things we discovered through some conversations we had with a number of these different players, we did some market research, was it actually wasn't the pathway experience that was the problem. They totally bought into the idea that this might come to an end at some point. What was the problem was the disconnect between the club experience and their drivers. So I think your research starting point was the disconnect between what was provided by coaches in a certain experience and what the participants' motivations are. And when those two things don't correlate, that's when the drop-off occurs.
Yeah. And the big thing, as I said, Rugby Australia was extremely supportive about this, and that's where we were trying to get to. Like, I spoke to Jason Gilmore, who was at the time the Queensland Reds Academy Director. He's now the Rugby Australia age grade high performance. He coached the under-20s this year. The big thing that he talked about was, so he stepped from probably one of the biggest rugby schools in Australia, certainly Brisbane, to an academy program. The big thing he talked about was contact. He used to have about 20 to 24 contact hours with his his top rugby players. That dropped to 4. When they stepped into the academy program. So as you just said, the disconnect or misharmony between what the program was trying to achieve to what the participants or the players of the program want to achieve has got further and further apart. All right, and again, that was being found from much younger, right through to this high performance program. The idea of, or what the coaches believed or perceived to be important to what was keeping kids involved in the game was getting further and further apart. So the idea of the research was to try and offer them essentially a quick fire. This was an online profile that players could complete and fill, and it was a template to, yes, it was some research, but it was also a template for future programs to go, all right, well, we understand we have lower contact hours, especially at this age grade, 18, 19, 20 years old. They have, they're exiting school where things are very much prescribed to them. It's industrialized format. They're told when to go and what to do when. to all of a sudden they have choice. There's a lot of other external distractions going on. They have, university jobs, girlfriends, everything else in between. They have choice. They can have a look. Other sports as well. This is the thing. We were talking at the end of the day. I was part of the University of Queensland rugby program. We would have lots of high performance kids come from, say Queensland schools, Australian schools background. But all of a sudden they would enter into the Colts program, and we would say to them, well, you only have to train Tuesdays, Thursdays with a game on Saturday. They'd wander off because there's bright lights, shiny things wandering about the place and whatever. So the idea was to create a template for coaches to connect to players and understand why they used to like rugby, why they should like rugby now, and what is going on outside rugby to try and pull them in to say, well, look, this is why you should come. This is why you should stay involved in the sport. This is what we can offer you both as a player and as a person. That was the predominant idea of the research, to try and, at the end of the day, not necessarily make better players, but have a bigger pool of players, or a bigger pool of the population who's still interested in the sport. Because, So
the thing I was going to say there was that, so from a retention perspective, this point around the coach, who is obviously often the leader of the environment that the athlete is part of, having a good understanding of what the athlete's looking for, and not an assumption of what they think the athlete's looking for. And so your research gives them that insight, doesn't it? It says that what these young people are looking for, because you can't necessarily control some of those other variables that you've just put out there. So, for example, if kids have been essentially on a force-fed diet of rugby, because in some contexts it's compulsory, and like you say, in a prescribed environment where at this hour you do this, then a bell rings, and then this hour you do this, and this hour you do this, and rugby's part of that mix. And at the same time, what we found as well is you get a lot of kids in a school environment who they're rock stars, and they come out of the school environment and they go somewhere else, and they're not rock stars anymore. They're just kind of anyone, and that's not the same. So there's a bit of that, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that what was really key for them to be part of the sport itself so some of those external variables aren't necessarily in control of coaches. So, for example, if someone's been in this force-fed environment and they then go into an environment that's got a lot more choice, there's not much we can do about that. The other thing is, if, for example, they've been playing since they were tiny and they get to 18 and think, you know what, I'm actually done. I'm actually done with this sport being everything for me. I actually want to experience some other parts of the world. And I think that's a genuine concern and fear, I think, is that so many kids now where like, this is it. And they're either doing it because it's the school asking them to, or they've got parents with expectations and they kind of know those expectations, whether they're explicit expectations or implicit expectations. There's definitely that connection of, I do this and I will get either, I will be rewarded by my parents because they will show me that they love me because I am involved in this activity and my success is contingent on that activity and all that sort of stuff. And they get into this new stage now where there's like lots of choice and stuff. And it's like, this thing that used to be my life, it's not going to be my life anymore. It's going to be part of my life. I'm going to basically access it kind of on demand when I want to. And the sporting world, us coaches, so go to them. No, you're either in or you're out. You're committed or you're not committed. We're not having you flim-flamming in when you want to. And now I'm not saying,
or you don't know what your life actually looks like.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So it's like not even that direct, is it? It's just like, here's an expectation. So you can understand why people go, you know what? I think I might just leave that world behind a little bit, and actually go and have a bit of exploration for a bit of time, a bit of freedom, see what's out there, explore the world, see other people, build relationships, create different connections. And if, as you're saying, that a lot of the connections are from outside of the sport itself anyway, you can kind of understand why they would sort of fall into that direction.
I just feel we as coaches need to identify the fact that, as you just said, a lot of the expectation within sports and high performance especially is that this is your life. This is what it looks like. This is the volume of dedication and things like that it needs to take. However, a lot of these players, and both at the high performance and beyond it as well, they don't necessarily want, they come there for an experience. They come there to go, how good can I make this look? How good, how can we, how can I step in with my friends and change the scope of what I believe that, the game of rugby, as this direct example, should look or should be played and things like that. At the end of the day, as you said, they step in to do something. And I've always tried to explain that to coaches as well. When you step into certain environments, you change or you try and act and react a different way as well. You shape and you modify how you look and how you feel and how you act to the environment that you're in. Now, we should step into the environment of sport, and as you said, it's a game. It's enjoyed. It should be kept that way. It should be kept as in, well, how can we change and structure the environment to offer them an enjoyable experience? How can we make it in such a way where they want to try and act and react and play a certain way and things like that? And that's the way it should be kept as well. We try and over-structuralized or over-constrained, bring in the term and things like that for how we want it to look. And it's how we want it to look as coaches, as opposed to understanding how the athletes or how the players, they want it to look. Right? We should be letting them drive it. They own it. It's pushed and driven by them, so that then they have greater buy-in. If you want that increased retention and increased attention, then you've got to let them drive it. It has to be driven from the ground up, and you're sitting in the back seat and letting them drive.
So where's the disconnect then between, where are the main disconnections between what coaches believe that the athlete is looking for? So we've already outlined what the athlete is looking for. They're driven by effort, achievement, self-achievement against their goals that they've set for themselves. They're driven by a sense of commitment. They want to try and utilize the coach as a resource to help them get towards those sorts of things. So I'm assuming where the disconnect is, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but the disconnect is the coach being overly driven by competence, and competence being important, because competence leads to outcome, and the outcome being the driver. So individuals being part of something in order to achieve outcome, that's the big area disconnection, as you mentioned about winning at the start. Their focus on outcome and winning is the thing that creates the separation between their separate motivations. Is that right?
To some extent, yeah. To some extent. It's at the end of the day. And again, there's good coaches out there. There's good coaches who allow these players to express and things like that. But again, I just feel the overbearing feeling towards the sport, as you said, it should be. I heard something the other day, and we've taken the game out of sport and left the competition. The focus has always been on the outcome. At the end of the day, it's all driven by the outcome and things like that. However, coaches should be managing, and coaches should be looking at the expectations of, well, how many of my players are involved again next year? How many of my players are just excited to be involved and things like that? The general coaching gist, and again, this was what I got from being involved. As I say, I was fortunate enough to be involved in what was the Junior Reds, Junior Gold, the Junior Gold Squad, the Junior Gold Cup. So it's the high performance program within Australia for about 6 or 7 years. It was very, very over contextualized. It was to throw a good pass, you have to have high elbows, hips square. This. You had about 4 or 5 lines of what made a good pass. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, and you talk to Mick Byrne, who worked with Dan Carter, obviously, in his kicking and things like that, it was one cue. It was one cue. Dan Carter told himself for a good kick, his chest needed to face the post. For a good pass, the ball needs to hit the hands. We need to really, almost bring it down on the level of context that we offer these players and things like that, and even to some extent ask them of what does a good pass look like, what does a good kick look like, what does a competitive game look like, how does this look, and things like that. We as coaches almost feel that we need to add, if we're there, we need to add value, or we need to add input to create value. When at the end of the day, we should just be creating the environment where they can explore what do we need, ask questions. The big thing I've talked to, even in the past week, I've talked to even swimming coaches, soccer coaches. We need to ask questions. We need to ask, why are these kids here? What do they want to look at? What do they want to achieve? What do they want to work on? I just feel as coaches, we're just, it's just words and things like that. It's just, we take from what we see and perceive to be of value, and force it upon, as opposed to going, well, it's an engagement industry. I'm sorry, like at the end of the day, age grade sport is an engagement industry. At the end of the day,
any sport really, doesn't it? Youth sport full stop is an engagement in industry.
100%. And I'm sorry, we're 6 months away from 2020. At the end of the day, if we're kidding ourselves, if we believe that sport is, it's not back, 20, 30 years ago, where organized sport was predominantly that. It was a sense of connection. It was, you got a lot of these self-determination theory. You got a sense of autonomy because you were there, you were willing, you were trying to put in effort. You got a sense of competency because you were getting better, and you got that sense of relatedness as being part of a group. Now you can find that through digital media, other sports. Like, again, we're wandering into the world of, X sports, digital sports, and things like that as well. There's other ways that kids and senior athletes can find it. So we need to create an engagement, an engaging atmosphere, an engaging environment. And for that, then we need to look at, as you said, our customers, which are the kids or the players or whoever it might be. So.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've said this before, sports aren't in competition with each other. So sports shouldn't worry about, for example, like rugby shouldn't, for example, worry about losing players to Aussie rules or rugby league or football or whatever it might be. They're in competition with all the things you just mentioned, all the other potential leisure pursuits. That's what we're in competition with. And the sports industry is in competition with all these other leisure pursuits. So actually, if we want to change the way or to provide that, well, firstly, you've got to understand that we've got to get better at the experience. So those people who are at the forefront of providing the experience, like you say, need better know that they're adding value, and it needs to be based on what those individuals. I mean, we talk about. I don't like the terminology particularly, but it's a good one in terms of changing the mindset around this idea of being more customer focused, if you like, and almost seeing the sports participant as a customer. I hear all the time clubs in particular talking about how players just aren't committed enough, like it's a problem that they need to solve, the players, not the other way around. And I keep saying, if you think about this, or if you think about this in a from a kind of like a gym chain, for example, if somebody comes in as a member and they want to leave, well, firstly, they work damn hard to get them in first place, and then they make it damn hard to get them to leave as well. And they put all sorts of different incentives and all those sorts of things. Now, I'm not saying the gym industry is particularly good at this either. I think they could be a hell of a lot better. But, they're more customer focused than, say, a sports club is. At the sports club, it's almost like, right, you want to come and play my sport? Well, you've got to give me this amount of money in order to be a member of our sports club. So you've got to pay for the privilege. I'm not saying you shouldn't have to pay, because I understand the idea of a subscription and these sorts of things. But, and then when you get here, what we're going to do is we're going to treat you like a commodity to help us win stuff, because that's the only thing we're interested in. So it's like you've got to pay for the privilege to be dehumanized and be treated like a commodity and told that you've got to be here, there, and everywhere at every single time, and you've got to do this and do that and do the other, and you haven't got any choice in this matter. That's what you're paying. You're paying to subsume yourself to this other thing, and we have got to change that narrative.
100%. Because, and again, if to look at the athletes and players as customers, at the end of the day, if a flailing business or a marketing company wasn't getting, as you said, if the gym industry wasn't getting enough customers through, they would explore other industries. They'd try and ascertain why it's not working, what's happening, what they must do differently, exactly as you said. And within sports, like, it's there. I mean, you can see a lot of sports do it. Matt Wilkie, who looks after the head of coaching the RFU, he's an Australian as well. But like, he's developed that in Ireland. He's done community practice. He's gone, all right, the Irish, we're surrounded by other different sports, different clubs, different teams, and things like that. Let's get ideas off each other. That's, again, that's the way it should be. And that's the beauty of the likes of UQ and even QUT, where we talk about, we have different coaches in different sports of a similar mindset, but pulling ideas off each other and things like that. Again, it's ultimately for the engagement of, the players. It's ultimately for greater participation, greater engagement, greater just improving, the athlete experience and retention within the sport. So.
You just to shift gears slightly, I just want to circle back to, so at the very start of this, one of your drivers or motivations was having a 17-year-old who dropped out of rugby twice. So
yes.
What was that? I mean, I'm assuming that you mentioned that it was about kind of overzealous coaching. Is a lot of what we've talked about, is that kind of what you saw? That was the kind of experience that he had, which was coaches essentially not connecting with players based on what they're looking for, but kind of driving them towards something else, which just created that sense of disconnection.
Comes back to what you said. It was that establishment of, they were focusing on the competency. They were focused on that. They started training very early. Rugby season for juniors especially starts in March. These fellas tried to start training in November, which is in the height of Australian summer and things like that. So again, it was a disharmony to what they were trying to do. Again, if they had have introduced them into training and it was very games based, or something where they were creating a sense of attachment or connection as a group, maybe so. But for this, it was, as you just said, earlier on, you said it was competency. It was very much focused on skill based, drill, to use a bad word for you, driven. It was focused on just how these players should act in the eyes of the coach or the program that they were involved in and things like that. So as opposed to as you say, if you're gonna have if you're gonna try and involve players for half a year, 6 months, 7 months of the year and things like that, it needs to be sort of dynamic, both in its movement and in its way of thinking as well. It needs to be different. You need to turn up to a training session and go and create that engaging atmosphere. Like, how can we, what are we going to get tonight, as opposed to turning up and going, like Alex said, in the podcast I've just listened to, you turn up to a training session and you could turn up 10, 15 minutes late and things like that and know pretty much what's going on. So that's how can you create a sense of enjoyment or engagement if you're turning up and doing the same thing over and over again. So using
some leadership analogies, very much that transactional leadership model that they were providing there, very much a kind of, you come here and you're going to get, and kind of like, I'm sort of saying, you're going to come here to help us achieve this that I've established. That this is important for me. I assume it's important for you. Haven't asked you, but I'm assuming it. And actually, I don't really care because it's important for me, and I'm the one making this environment work. So you buy into my vision of where we're going, or basically get out. And as opposed to that transformative or even servant leadership model, where it's about saying to the individuals, right, what's important to you about this experience? What role can I play to make that experience as good as possible? And either then adding value to that experience and driving that environment, or getting out of the way. Because if you can't add value to it, get out of the way. At least get out of the way and allow them to create that environment for themselves. And I've often find that the more out the way you are, the more that environment starts to emerge, because the individuals begin to create the environment for themselves anyway.
Absolutely. And again, I guess I don't know if it was because they were entering into a stage. So, I mean, one of the real times that sticks out with me, he was, say 14 years of age. And again, it was that's what I was talking about there before, where it was very prescribed, very orderly, they call it that as well. And again, I mean, as we talk about a lot in sport of how it's not, especially in rugby union, it's not orderly. Rugby union, soccer, these types of team dynamic sports, it's not orderly. The ugly is expected. That's what it looks like. That's what a game looks like. I'm sure you've been to a few under 14 rugby games in your time, and you'll see it. Like it's there's knock-ons, it's reactions and things like that. That's what the game of rugby looks like. The more you try and make practice look perfect, then you'll never get anywhere close to that on a Saturday. And again, we don't know whether it was because they were stepping into, say, the higher squads, and the parents are starting to pay a bit more because they're getting, to an older age grade and things like that, because that's the breakdown in Australia and whatever. But yeah, it was just, it felt like it had to be more rigid, orderly, organized. Death by cones, they call it anything else, running in certain lines, certain ways and things like that. But again, it just didn't.
This is in the talent pathway. So these are kids who've progressed up to higher levels, and now it's becoming even more rigid, more structured, more ordered, more prescribed.
Sadly, and that's like, it's to give an example. I dealt with one of the elite rugby schools in Brisbane there a few weeks ago, and we were just even talking about the basic of kickoffs. Kickoffs are probably one of the most exhausting things for me in rugby union at the moment, because you just see the same kickoff again and again and again. It'll go, centre or deep to the 22, we catch, we clear, and on it goes. And again, trying to talk to these players, these under 16 players, of what would be the most horrible kickoff you would receive. And they bounce 2 or 3 ideas off each other. I said, do that for the next 2 or 3 times. But they couldn't even fathom it. It becomes, as you said, it becomes so prescribed from somewhere else that they don't even consider these ideas or extending. What possibly might happen, or what does it look like, or what if you did this? What would happen? So on and so forth. We just, as coaches, we don't. Especially in rugby union, I feel we don't ask enough questions. We just prescribe. We just tell.
It's interesting. I think all sports have their conventions, and one of the things that I know, working with coaches from different sports, is I'll often say, like, "Why do you do that?" And they just do, because that's what you do. And they're not necessarily thinking beyond some of that stuff. Now, some of the stuff I come up with is impractical or unrealistic or mental, or just totally out off the wall. But sometimes there's stuff there that's also like, oh yeah, hadn't really thought about that. And like, for example, I'll give it a simple example, right? I was talking with a tennis coach not long ago, and we were doing some work together, and he was asking me about different ways that, he could work with, particularly with youngsters. They do lots of stuff with like youngsters who are learning the game. And I said, well, one of the things you're constrained by is court space, right? But you put nets up, and then he says, well, we have to have queues, because we've only got so much space, and there's only so many nets, and we've got like 4 nets, and we've got 20 kids, and it means they have to have a queue to be able to wait for their turn to have a shot. And I said, well, why do you need nets? What do you mean? I said, well, why can't you play a game where, for example, you've just got use any space on the court and you volley each other? And he goes, well, they won't be able to volley because they haven't got the racket skill. And I said, that depends on which ball you use, doesn't it? And so you've got people like, for example, Judy Murray, who uses balloons. And getting kids to volley with a balloon, because they can do that because the balloon's there. But there's also different types of ball that you could use that would be easier to use. Or, for example, a lighter ball, like a very lightweight football, the sort of football that you'd find on the beach. You buy on the beach and you use it for about a day and then it deflates, or but one of those would be ideal because it's sort of quite slow and light, but it gives an opportunity for them to do things. And then you could still play with bouncing, and we talked about different things with bouncing and learning about racket control and all these sorts of things. And he said, I need loads of different balls, don't I? I said, yeah, because you only ever use the balls that they give you. You know, and in tennis over here, you've got the red ball, which is slightly bigger and it's got less bounce, so it's easier for them to be able to play rallies with. And then you've got the green, and it's progressive, and it's, you know, okay, great. But that's not the only ball you're going to use, because that ball doesn't work for certain other activities that you're going to do. He says, yeah, I need a big box to put different balls. And I said, yes, you do. Some sponge balls. You need some bigger balls. You need some mini footballs. You need some, all these lightweight balls, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so that was like one example of that. But rugby in particular, I want to talk to you about this. My time in rugby, I had 3.5 years within rugby. And one of the things I found with it was it seems to me, and I could be really being unfair, and I'm happy to be shot down. I'm probably going to get a load of rugby coaches just absolutely paneling me for this. But it seems to me that it's quite unimaginative in terms of, like you say, asking those questions around, could we do it this way? What are the things that we could try here? What would happen if we did it this way? And it's very, very much driven by convention. So, you know, as an example, like, and it feels like it takes an innovator to do something different, and then everyone will just follow suit. So I'll give you an example: the Sunny Bill offload, right? Oh, everyone does that now. That's okay. It's like it's permitted. But prior to him doing that, no, you can't do that. No, we're going to do it properly. You know, keep the ball safe. So it's almost like
you got to go around and play it.
Yeah. You almost need innovators to do things before people will go along and go, we can do that now. It's almost like even as simple as things like the convention of the number of the types of people and number of people who you have in certain positions. This is probably one of those really random suggestions, but I often said to people, why do the little guys lift up the big guys? Why don't you get the big guys to lift up the little guys? Because some of the big guys aren't that good at catching, right? The little guys are really good at catching. So why don't we get one of the little guys, throw them up in the air more or less, get them to catch, because all we're really trying to do is trying to get the ball out of the air and give it to someone else so we can get on with the game. But I remember people looking at me just going, yeah, whatever, okay. Yeah, just go back in your box over there.
And that's the thing. At the end of the day, that's without asking these questions, without, you know, I mean, I'd love to see where, you know, they call it constraint-led learning or game-based practicing can get to in rugby union. Again, the framework's there. The rules of the game are there.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you can't pass the ball forwards. You can't, you know, there's certain things you cannot do in rugby union. Outside that, who says what you can't do? You know what I mean? And again, who says, like, we as coaches, are we constrained by what we perceive or what we've known in the past? At the end of the day, these, for me, especially in age grade rugby, especially in local age grade rugby, at the end of the day, they played against these players for probably 5, 6, 7 years. They know who they're up against, what they're doing, and things like that. So why should we be writing the game plan we've coached them for a handful of weeks or something like that? Why can't they look at the game and go, well, this is what we can do well. This is the ways that we can, you know, I mean, strike or attack or do whatever we want. You know, why should they not be driving it a bit more, I guess? So, as you said, why isn't the big fella in the line out going, well, I really can't catch, but guess what? I can throw this little nipper up really high and stuff. So you know, they call it that. But yeah, that's we're not, as coaches, just asking questions. We're not letting them drive it. We're too much. It's too, you know, autocratic, driven, you know, I mean, top driven, whatever way you want to call it, things like that, because as you said, that's how it's been done. But and again, so, if we're stepping forward, you know, I mean, that's they call it an engagement industry, call it whatever, and things like that. That's how it can be done in future, essentially. So,
just on your point about the kickoff, What happened? What did they come up with when you? What's the worst kind of kickoff?
Yeah, it was really So they knew there was a couple of big second rows. You know, I mean, so what's the worst kickoff? Oh, if you drilled it hard and low at the big second row, he has to bend, you know, I mean, 3 foot down to try and pick it up. Yeah, of course, you know, I mean, things like this happen. And again, don't get me wrong. Then, you know, the other side, then the big second row became aware of this, and, you know, he came around again, things like that. But you're starting to agitate the game. You're starting to create different outcomes as opposed to the no. That's at the end of the day. That's what I said to them. I said, look, at the end of this, you can put the kickoff high. You know, I mean, you know, middle and left. They'll catch it. They'll clear it. But if you do something slightly different, even if you do, a flat and short kickoff or something like that, just making them think about the game. It's just something different. As you said, the boundaries of the game there, it has to go for the kickoff. That's exactly what we talked about. For a kickoff, what does it have to do? It has to go 10 meters. All right, is there anything else? Everyone has to be behind the kick. All right, anything else? That's it. Okay, so
on that, right? So the purpose, in my opinion, of the kickoff is one of two things, isn't it? It's either to get the ball as far away as possible from your own try line so that you can set up some sort of defensive platform from there, or it's to kick it the minimum distance required in order to give you the best possible opportunity to be able to then get possession in a fairly good advanced attacking area. They're the two choices, aren't they?
Yep, fascinating enough, and they worked that out. At the end of the day, one of their first kickoffs was he essentially tried to, he kicked it as far and as long, as far and as high as he could down the middle of the field, because then that would be the furthest they'd have to kick either direction. So that was his first kickoff. I went, right, okay, that's good. But as you said, what's the aim of the kickoff? At the end of the day, you don't play rugby to defend. You don't play rugby to concede the least points. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to get the ball back. Right, there you go. And that's when they came up with the horrible kickoff to the second row, a flat kickoff to whoever it might have been. And that's when we restructured things. We put two wingers loaded on one side, so all of a sudden you got two fast blokes trying to chase down a ball, and it became a contestable kickoff. So, and again, it was just my pet peeve, and it's always been my pet peeve for a while and things like that, because that's, for me as well, the thing about you don't want dynamic sports such as rugby is part of the idea is to make the other side uncomfortable. At the end of the day, you're trying to.
So on kickoffs, right? It's just some thoughts that have emerged that I've had over the years, right? And obviously, I don't. So, for example, you obviously got two types of kickoff, haven't you? There's a drop kick or the ball is fixed. Right, and you can do different things with either, right? But one is, so in football when they do a free kick, and you sometimes have two people stood over the ball, and like one will fake and then the other one will kick. Why can't you do that? So you could kick to either side.
Yeah,
just as easily. Now with a drop kick, it's harder because you've got to pass the ball to somebody else before they kick it, but it could still be done quite quickly and create a sense of disorganized. So, for example, the thing about rugby is so you've got those two. There's two things. One is get it as far away as possible, or try and get it back. Right now, if you're going to try and get it back, it strikes me that you want to try and create as much disorder as you possibly can, because. So, for example, what you do is the ball itself is naturally disorderly because it's a disorderly shape, and so it has lots and lots of variability. Things can go crazy with it, right? But what we do is we put the ball up in the air where it's gonna travel in its most orderly way. And allow the defensive side to organise themselves, throw somebody up in the air, catch it, set up a platform, and then they boot it away using their, in inverted commas, exit strategy. Now, I'm thinking so for example, the onside kick in American football, they do the opposite, don't they? They kick it end over end on the basis at some point it pops up in the air and it creates chaos and mayhem, and then all of a sudden the ball bops in it. So you might get a knock on, right? Brilliant. We're a great attacking platform with a scrum in the right place. If you don't get a knock on, you've got a good chance of getting hold of it because of the mayhem and the chaos of the ball bouncing around. We don't know where it's going to go. They don't know where it's going to go. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I've often thought to myself, what like you said, load the fast people, right? So we're going to do a certain kick hard and fast. We need whippets to be able to get hold of that. So you're almost kicking it almost a bit like a quarterback pass. Where you're kicking it quite flat to an area where your fastest people might be able to get on the end of that, and things like that. So it feels to me a little bit like we can borrow from another sport, and I've used American football and soccer twice, American football twice and soccer once, but just say, look, they do things like that. We could borrow from that and use that to be creative in the kickoff to give us maximum opportunity to get the ball back.
Yeah, and again, interestingly, so when they did that, they loaded the two wingers onto the one side. For the first couple of kicks, they reshuffled and had the second row tap it back. For the third one, they did a very similar kick as well. One of the wingers, they talked to each other. One of the wingers overran it. One of the wingers competed like he did. And sure enough, then he tapped it back into the other winger's hand. He overran it, stuff like that. Again, that's they just learned from, all right, well, we're trying this, action, reaction, and on they go, and things like that. But again, that's where we, as you said, we as coaches, you can't overprescribe this stuff. You can't tell, at the end of the day, you have to let them go, well, like, again, ask the questions. What happens if you try this? And then let them adjust and react and things like that. Because same thing again, if that happens on a Saturday or Sunday or whenever they play, you can't step over the paint. They're the ones who need to read the game and see it and see what's going to happen, and make adjustments on the go. So,
if you're, that's like one example. That's a set piece, isn't it? That can be done in a very different way.
No.
But I mean, even in outside of that, I mean, just some of the conventions about like who does what, how. Like, it's interesting, isn't it? How, for example, like everyone's talked about, like say back row moves have gone out of the game. Now, is that a consequence of the fact that? So, for example, one of the assumptions was that the reason a back row move went out of the game is because the only thing they were trying to do was get a penalty from the scrum. So everybody stayed in the scrum in order to give maximum power to be able to get a penalty to then and win the game through penalties. And actually, back row moves went out because they weren't particularly profitable. But now they've sort of started to come back. And that's in a response to the fact that there's less scrummage penalties because they changed the rules around the engagement, which meant that the scrum goes down less, and therefore the opportunities to get a penalty were less. And so they start to then do more creative things out of the back of the scrum. But it's interesting how everybody follows suit. Nobody goes. What made me think about it was what Conor O'Shea did with the Italy side, where he basically used the rules against England because he knew that England would basically play a ruck in a certain way. And if you don't commit people to the tackle, it's not a ruck.
and it was fascinating. It was fascinating how the world of rugby lost its mind for 40 minutes.
It did.
They just couldn't. They couldn't even fathom how well. This isn't sport. This isn't rugby. This isn't how it's played. This isn't how it's looked. You can't come to Twickenham and shove our rules back in their face, essentially. But that was exactly. At the end of the day, Conor O'Shea admitted afterwards at the end of the day that the strength of the English game was the phase play and working up and building pressure and things like that. So how could he negate that by just not creating a ruck? So he didn't create phases. He didn't let them set it. They stepped off and they were able to fold round. And again, it worked for a certain period of time, and sadly they were blown away in the second half, things like that. But if nothing else, it's just fascinating to see. It's things like that. And again, the Brisbane Broncos, to touch on rugby league. I remember probably one of the most excited I've been in a rugby league game for a long time was the Brisbane Broncos a couple of years ago. They kicked on the first tackle. It's not done. Again, it's not rugby league. You don't kick on the first tackle, but they had James Roberts, one of the fastest players on the outside. Greg Inglis stepped into the back of the scrum. He got the ball and kicked it. There was no one home. Ran the length. He gathered it after about 40 or 50 meters and scored the try. But again, but it happened once. It was almost just why, as you said, why wouldn't you sort of even tiptoe around it again? These are things.
Yeah, at the very least, look. Because it's a fairly low it's a low percentage thing to do because Absolutely. Okay, you lose possession, but you've gained a significant amount of territory by virtue of the fact that there's nobody there. Or so even if they recover the ball, you're in a good field position, and then you can set up your defensive platform. Whereas often when the kick comes, it's when there's about 3 people in the backfield, so they've got maximum opportunity to return the kick.
Yeah, but again, and as you said, do the players feel just as we were talking about with this under 16 side? Do the players feel that no, it's just not this isn't what the coach wants, or this isn't what expected, or it's not it's just not the sport, to call it that as well.
I love the question. I love the question you posed, by the way. What is the game of the kickoff? I love that because it's very similar to a question I ask a lot, which is, what's this game asking you to do? So I obviously design a game which is usually based on, say, a moment in time in the game. and I'm saying, what is this game asking you to do? And so it's quite interesting how, and by asking that question, or maybe sometimes offering them an idea about where the solution might be found, or where the information is that might help them come up with a solution. Then you have to sometimes do that, because they can't always conceive of that, particularly the age groups I'm tending to work with, which are a bit younger. But interestingly, that very question, what's this game? What's the what are the opportunities in this game? What can we come up with? And it's interesting how, when you do that, your own, because we're all constrained as coaches, we're constrained by those conventions, and they limit our beliefs and all those sorts of things. So actually offering the creation of the solution to the participants is actually really powerful from us, because you can then tap into their natural inherent creativity and curiosity, because they're not as constrained as us by the conventions. And so they come up with ideas, some of which might not be feasible. Some of them might not work. Some of them might not be that effective. Some of them might not be possible within the rules. But you might get a little nugget of gold.
100%. And touching what you were talking about there, at the end of the day, that's where a lot of the time we, if I'm doing, cause every team, again, rugby union, they gather around, they play a game of touch before they warm up. So you facilitate that, you let them sort of eke into it. But the one thing we'll do is, all right, divvy up into two teams. The two teams make rules. All right, they're allowed to do. I'm pretty certain I've stolen this off the Magic Academy team, but anyway, they're allowed to make two of their own rules, whether it be, the second rows have to be touched twice or whatever it is, and things like that. They tell one team tells one coach, one team tells the other coach, and things like that, and they just play normal touch. But the other team has to be aware of what the rules are. You play for 10 minutes. All right, what was the other team's rules? 4 or 5 guesses at it and things like that. They might get 1 or 2. But the idea is, as you said, they're trying to make rules and ideas around to extend the game. But at the same time, all of a sudden you're really switching them on to be aware of what's going on in the game. It becomes less routine and just methodical and just sort of stepping into a training session and whatever. All of a sudden you're taking their awareness from the start. You're really switching them on to, all right, well, what could, again, same thing. The framework of the game is there, especially within rugby union. You can do certain things, you can't do certain things. So what are they doing that is outside the norm, to really try and have a look and sort of have an idea of what they're trying to do and things like that. So, very similar to what you're talking about. So.
And for me, creating an environment full of possibility, full of opportunities for creativity, full of opportunities for them to feel like they are, kind of part of designing their way of playing, and then them genuinely owning that way of playing, and us acting as the kind of facilitator of that process and helping them make some of the decisions and guiding them through that process and all those sorts of things. Again, then links back to what you were saying earlier around the idea of self-determination theory. That sense of autonomy leads to mastery, leads to a sense of purpose, very much owned by them. I'm using the Dan Pink version, by the way. But they, and they, and that then leads to that sort of intrinsic drive around, we have created this environment, and there's an individual there who has acted as a helper to us creating the environment. That's a fundamental shift in how a lot of people view the role of the coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's where, coming on the self-determination theory, that's where being very fortunate to work with the likes of Cliff Mallet. He's touched a lot on this, in UQ and other studies and things like that as well. But yeah, that's as you said, that sense of autonomy, competency, and relatedness. So the feeling that they're in control of their own decisions, that they are improving based on what they find important to improve on, and that it's a collaborative or collective goals that they're working towards, or helping others to work towards, and things like that. So and that's this relatedness, it doesn't need to be a massive sense. We don't need people to have that sense of full team harmony and things like that. They can have a buddy system or mates within it and things like that, where they're essentially looking out for each other and they're picking up on each other's cues and helping each other. That's what you always find, that people in similar positions, you hear it in the high performance environment, even the likes of England, you've heard, and the Crusaders environment, people in similar positions, they're pushing and striving and telling each other, focus on this area and things like that. Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be, as you said, an overall collective, this sort of team harmony. It just needs to be, you have a connection with, be it a coach, be it a co-player, be it whatever, or even an identity within the group, that you're working towards. But yeah, self-determination theory is a very big thing. That basic needs theory it's something I feel that coaches should be more aware. And again, if they were more aware, we would get a lot more of this athlete-centered practices and environments, in the organized sports.
So I can't let you go because we're sort of coming up on time-ish, but I can't let you go without discussing growth mindset.
Yes.
Because your latest article covers this area, and I think it was at least partially inspired by some research that has been recently published in Times Educational Supplement around growth mindset that appears at face value, or at least if you would believe so-called, in inverted commas, educational realist Paul Kirshner. And by educational realist, I wonder if what that's a euphemism for. Anyway, believes he described then. So this piece of research then basically said, right, growth mindset, it's BS, doesn't exist. It's throw it out, gone. And I literally flew back at him to say, well, firstly, that's not what this research says. You've misrepresented it. And subsequently then said, and also, you're completely missing the point. So firstly, your research methods on this piece of research are flawed beyond imagination for us to be able to draw that level of. And what's fascinating is he cites research, right, that supports his argument. I mean, it's like the best sort of confirmation bias you've ever seen, right? He cites research or slags off research, right, that is against his particular worldview. And says it's all it's completely flawed, blah, 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 blah. And he gets something like this that is literally paper thin in its design, and then says, right, an entire body of work, Dweck's life work, if you like, is BS because of it. I mean, the level of academic double standards, it's horrific. He hasn't responded to me, interestingly enough, but plenty of other people will. And anyway, your contribution I thought was fantastic. Just let's walk through this discussion for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's just look, and again, the big thing for me, well, it was a couple of things at the end of the day. Number one, just because it can be measured doesn't mean it doesn't matter. You know what I mean, or something along those lines. At the end of the day, like really, you know what I mean? You've done a thin, as you said, a thin study. It was 5,000 students at 11 years of age who had been introduced by a teacher who had been introduced to growth mindset about 8 weeks ago or something like that. Yada yada yada. And again, my thing is, the second part of it is, if you have kids, like again, as I say, I have a 17-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old. At the end of the day, a growth mindset, there's no band-aid. It's not a big thick paintbrush that you just paint over and you have a growth mindset. At the end of the day, it's something you work on. It's something you try and instill in kids, in athletes, in adults, to be honest with you. At the end of the day, are we all kidding ourselves that you don't get into a headspace where you do have a fixed mindset, to call it that, where you feel that no matter of effort, no matter of extra work or anything like that, or you know, I mean, a different perception, different outlook will change something. The growth mindset, at the end of the day, it's trying to understand, and it comes back to that self-determination theory. If you feel that you have a level of input, understanding, connection to others, if you feel like you're progressing to something, it's that sense of progression. It's the sense of that you're actually going to get somewhere through effort, that you're going to get somewhere through resilience, grit, whichever way you want to call it, and things like that. It's not just that talent, essentially, that you're born into this world and talent, you're graced with God or whatever it might be with this, and I mean, that's where you'll end up essentially. So yeah, it's, I guess, having done research myself, and again, coming back in my research, and there was holes and areas of weakness, say, within my research and things like that. There were certainly gaps and areas that could have really been dipped upon with a much more in-depth approach and things like that. This felt it was very skimmed. It felt like it was very thin, as you just said. It didn't feel. It felt like it was really glossed over at the end of the day, and that's where I tried to put questions of the research in there. At the end of the day, a growth mindset, it isn't necessarily on. Yes, you were trying to understand the improvements it would make on, from memory, it was English, maths, punctuation, grammar, and so on and so forth. My question was, how did this improve their way of learning? Did they improve, or did they grow in admiration or interest in other subjects as a result of the techniques that were involved or introduced? How were they? Did the teachers actually prescribe or offer this? What they consider to be a growth mindset. What was the impact on, say, 8-year-olds or 14-year-olds? It was sadly, it was very pigeonholed in a subject that, as I say, having 3 children, that's probably to call it close to my heart. But certainly, just as you say, you wouldn't want to consider, any of my children to sort of have, or any even athletes or players that I'm involved in, to have a fixed mindset. You want them to have that growth mindset. You want them to step into an existing environment or a new environment and try and aspire and try and put in increased effort to try and test themselves, to try and utilize even they call it their fixed talents in a different way, to see if they can expand even their ideas or mindset, or if nothing else, test somebody else or encourage somebody else to collaboratively or collectively extend or push goals and things like that. So yeah, sadly, it was like you, and I was trying to be very PC and democratic about it. But yeah, it was quite flimsy in how it was portrayed and things like that. So which was disappointing and frustrating, to say the least.
Well, so here are my problems, right, with it. So firstly, let's just talk about the approach to the research. So what happened was, teachers went on a 1-day training course, and then children were taught, they were given resources, and then they had an 8-week program where they were taught about, and I'm going to emphasize that word, about the theory, growth mindset theory, basically. So they were taught about the fact that, you don't have to have, you don't, in a fixed mindset, you think, smarter, it's about, working harder, et cetera, and effort and achieved results and all these. So we're taught about it, right? And they did exercises and all that sort of stuff. Now, that's not what growth mindset seeks to do, right? You can't just explicitly teach about it and then expect individuals to have a completely different belief system, particularly when they are surrounded by fixed mindsets. The education system, certainly in the UK, where the research was conducted, is one gigantic fixed mindset, right? You have setting, right? You differentiate through sets. So some kids are deemed to be naturally superior than others and what have you. So that in itself is a fixed mindset thinking. Now, however, whatever you think about setting as a means by which to educate children, right? All you need to understand is that in itself is a demonstration of a cultural set of values that basically says there are groups of individuals who are smarter than others. in itself, that is a example of fixed mindsetness. So they're surrounded by an environment that basically says fixed mindset, fixed mindset, fixed mindset. Now, you then say to kids, but by the way, if you work hard, you can do anything you like. I'm being massively flippant, right? But you know what I mean. Broad. I mean, and that isn't, by the way, what growth mindset is. That's also a misapprehension. So, firstly, you teach them about it, as opposed to immersing them for a period of time, and it may be 4 to 5 to 6 years, immersing them in an environment with a constantly reinforced message that about and this is the other bit. Growth mindset for me, like you say, it's not something you have. You can't be taught it and you've got it. It's something that you begin to acquire by virtue of the messaging all around you. And it's not something that you actually ever have. It's not. So it's a bit like skill acquisition. You don't have it. It's something you become attuned to. It's kind of an approach to dealing with difficulty and challenge in your life and problem solving. Now, you've got two choices when faced with difficulty or challenge. You can either go, well, I'll never be any good at that, fixed mindset, or you can go, right, what are the different ways in which I can approach this problem? And if I keep going, I'll probably have some kind of a breakthrough. Somebody might be able to help me. There might be a source material I might be able to use. And if I keep cracking this, I'll get there. I know I'll get there, because this is about working at it. Yeah, this isn't necessarily just about I'm working at it in different ways, doing things differently, doing different things. That's the mindset you want. Now, if Paul Kirshner says, right, that this theory is rubbish, if he's trying to tell me that children or young people having that kind of approach to problem solving and challenge is bad, right, regardless of what the theory tells us, right, then the geezer needs, fine. He literally has zero credibility in my eyes on any front. Right, and if I'm honest, I don't care whether that piece of that theory can't be empirically tested, because I am fundamentally committed to the idea that a group of young people looking at challenge and problem solving with a mindset that suggests let's try a range of different things in order to solve that, out with any level. Okay, there are other different levels of intelligence. Who knows? But fine. Let's say there are. Doesn't matter. Everybody will benefit from that. Absolutely everybody. And I just feel like they've just completely looked at this completely the wrong way. And the very experimental design is an example of how bad people think about the way we look at education.
And I guess that's my thing with it as well. At the end of the day, as much as I'm on the growth mindset, I'm very much under the Vygotskian theory of the zone of proximal development. But to look at even the zone of that, to talk about scaffolding, as skill acquisition or learning or things like that, then you have to want to be scaffolded. So you have to want to have the feedback and criticism, to call it that, and things like that. You have to want to have that around you, essentially, to build up. All right. So the growth mindset grows within that scaffolding as well. So that's where I think I'd love to say, scaffolding or the ZPD grows up and out, because you'll gain perspective on the outside, but you'll also grow your tower and grow your skill acquisition, learning, intelligence, whatever it might be. But on a similar vein, I'm like yourself, I have 3 kids. Why would I want them to think that intelligence, talent, whatever it is fixed? How can I tell them as part of a society and things like that you can't help a collective or collaborative, be it a classroom, be it a team, be it whatever it might be, that you can't help somebody else by the desire to essentially want to get better within yourself and outside, things like that, through essentially through your mindset, whatever. It just doesn't compute for me. I'm sorry. We might as well be. You might as well just be wandering like robots and things like that.
They also, going back to your point about what can be measured matters as well, is the measure, right, was completely flawed, right? So their measure was attainment. So we spent teach them a training course. By the way, they didn't follow up with them and follow training just to see what they then did. Did they actually create this cultural environment, or did they? No, they did a training course, right? So the assumption being the training course, 1-day training course, is enough. right? I mean, you know as well as I do, I've been on one-day training courses. You come out, you only remember 10% of it. So the fact that these individuals, so they had training course, they got resources, they taught the kids explicitly about this thing. Forget all that bit. The measurement of whether it worked or not was how they did on their SATs. The assumption being that this growth mindset training in kids, forget the fact that it was right, doesn't work. Why? Because they didn't do better on their SAT scores. Well, you're measuring the wrong thing, because actually, okay, some of Dweck's research did show an improvement in particular maths tests, but that was based on this slightly different environment. And I know there's been problems with replication of her research, but actually the whole field of psychology is having a replication crisis, right? And that's just because of the complexity of all the different variables. However, let's just come back to this. It doesn't invalidate it, but anyway, just coming back to this point around, so if, for example, they'd looked at, right, so what would be the ingredients of behavior that we would want to see in the children in terms of how they approach the challenges of revision for SATs tests or whatever it is, and all those sorts of things, right? Now, so you're not necessarily going to get an improvement outcome, but what you might get is an improvement on their commitment to the learning process, their approach to the SATs tests, their degree of resilience through that, what is relatively stressful point, testing for 11-year-olds, whatever you think about that. Anyway, they looked at the wrong thing. They measured their verification of success was based on the wrong thing. So it's like saying, right, we did this training course, we delivered it like that, it didn't work. And then what you've got now, people on Twitter saying, yeah, we should just go for the simpler things like clear, direct instruction, because that actually gets results.
Yeah. Ultimately, it was quantitative measures when it should have been qualitative.
Absolutely.
To call that.
Yeah.
I mean, it should have been, as you said, the big measure that I felt was missing was, did these involved kids gain a better understanding of how to learn? Or, as you said, did they overcome a sense of adversity or something like that? Did they essentially feel, intrinsically, did they believe that they got better as a result of being involved in this program, as opposed to being measured? As you said, and again, we all know how, be it sports, be it whatever, and things like that. There's, that pressure to perform. At the end of the day, was this done through testing? How was it measured? Again, how was the increase in application, or how was the increase in spelling, grammar, and so on and so forth? How was that measured? Was it, as I say, was it done in a testing environment? Was it done? So many questions, so many gaps, and things like that. But as you said,
I assume it was based on their predicted SAT test scores versus their actual SAT test scores. I presume it was based on, but I could be wrong. I don't know, and I'd have to go into it and look at that. But anyway. I did
try to be honest.
Did you as well? Did you have a look?
Yeah. I tried to work out how they were tested and stuff like that. And there's just
doesn't tell
again,
you.
it's no. Well, and I guess to some extent they maybe don't want to, but and again, it just, for me, it felt like it was quantitative study when it should have been qualitative. Like who knows? Like if we went back and asked the same students and things like that, did this increase your interest for other subjects? Did this increase your how many co-students, how many other students do you feel you helped as a part of investigating around, spelling, grammar, and so on, and mathematics and stuff like that? Again, my conclusion was
this meaningless educational intervention failed to produce improvements in performance results, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Why don't we test that against something else? So let's use a different. Let's use a different methodology in a different. Let's have some control groups and all these sorts of things. Just man alive! But the fact that somebody who purports to be and is very, very well regarded and very followed, someone like Kirshner, then decides the conclusion he draws is the whole theory is bullshit. I mean, good Lord.
I guess, and again, the reason why I tried to be, the reason why I wrote it, my article, and the reason why I was probably as diplomatic as it was because the comments around it. It was like, oh yeah, well, we knew this all along. And it's like,
yeah.
Well, but again, if you actually look at Dweck's work, if you understand what she was trying to get around it, things like that. How would you not want those qualities in your son or daughter, as an example, or your athletes, or whatever, or your students, whatever it might be? Would you not want them to, have a sense of resilience or determination, or explore, or essentially not give up on adversity and take feedback or criticism well? How, like those key points that are around it and things like that. Those are just bullet points around it. How would you not want them, or your next employee, even? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, these are qualities.
For me, it's the dangers of the alternative, right? So in your article, right, you quote Dweck, right? So 2015, she's gone. Who, by the way, is open about this, that the implementation of it is a challenge, right? So here are some, she could easily go, and a lot of researchers have done this. Look, I've done my research. It's told us this. Now it's up to you guys to do the implementation bit, right? And she said that to me before. I've met her, and she was at a conference that I ran, and she said to me, I'm not a coach. I don't know how to apply this stuff. You guys have to work that out. I'm just going to tell you what I know. But she's not shying away from it. So she's actually doing implementation studies now where they're going to look at the different issues around implementation and try and navigate some of this stuff. And that's pretty brave. But anyway, in your article, you said a growth mindset isn't just about effort. As Dweck writes, in a fixed mindset, everything is about the outcome. If you fail, or if you're not the best, it's all been wasted. The growth mindset allows people to value what they're doing regardless of the outcome. They're tackling problems, charting new courses, working on important issues. Now, for me, that's your fundamental, absolutely biggest thing, right? The danger of the alternative is that, and this goes back to where we started this whole conversation, is, when you become focused on outcome, it's like, well, all the work is wasted if we don't achieve the outcome. Well, the message you're sending there is there's no point working, because what if you fail? The bounce of a ball can determine whether what we did was wasted or what we did was valuable. We are validated as individuals. Now, for me, one of the things that's great about just this approach to thinking about human problem solving and challenge is to say there's value in the struggle anyway. The struggle is where the value is. The outcome is just a validation of that struggle. Nothing else.
100%, and that's where, at the end of the day, there's a massive element of research out there. To draw upon Cliff, he was talking about a presentation he did about 12 months ago with James Vaughan about dynamic thinking. At the end of the day, there's problems out there that you'll never get an outcome for. Yeah. But it's thinking about those problems. It's thinking about essentially how close can you get? You know what I mean? Or at the end of the day, there's always going to be questions that can never be answered to some extent. Yeah. But for exactly what you said, at the end of the day, if it's driven by the outcome, that's two sides of of both coins. In a sports context, if the coach and or the player is driven by the outcome, then no one's going to be happy at the end of the day. So it's just exploring that, again, that dynamic thinking of exploring of the possibilities and what could be there. And seeing it as an experience, or just where it can possibly lead to, and again coming back to it, and not driven by the outcomes, not driven by what it is or how it's been played or so on and so forth. It's more just all right, well, let's see where we can get to essentially on this, and being happy with the results as per that and things like that. But yeah, again, for me, it just exhausts, for exactly what you said, the flip side of it. And as you said, Dweck's been very good on her coming back and saying, and again, she even describes there's a fixed mindset, there's a growth mindset, and there's in between. At the end of the day, you can slip and slide in between. So to say that it's rubbish and doesn't exist, so then could we, for that, perception, say, well, these kids are in a fixed mindset or haven't learned from the growth mindset, or as my wife would say, you're not there yet. At the end of the day, you're not there yet.
Yeah, the power of yet is what she talks about a lot. Yes. The yet. The thing for me though is the point I was trying to make as far as that was concerned was that I think the way she's identified also the false growth mindset, which is where people purport to have a growth mindset and are then trying to do growth mindset-y things, but actually they haven't They haven't bought into the idea of it at all, because when it comes down to it, they're still driven by the outcomes. And actually, quite a lot of schooling environments have false growth mindsets, and the kids see right through it. Because ultimately, I know my child's just been through his SATs, and some teachers are fantastic, and his teacher was. She said, "Look, this is just a way for us to look at the progress you're making. It's no big in a letter, but the school is measured on it. And so the environment, the cultural, socio-cultural dynamic, the political environment is driving schools to extol the fixed mindset. The system is fixed. It's about outcome. School good. These results equals good school. These results equals bad school."
The best example I give for that, and my daughter is the same, my 6-year-old daughter, so she's out of school, and they're fantastic for it. They talk about growth mindset and things like that, whatever, and they try and create and offer a sense of creativity. They've got combined classrooms. I think it's madness for the teachers. They've got a class essentially of 52 kids, but they wander around the place and do what they want to do. But one of the first things I seen the start of this year was, so they did this, as I say, it was a big classroom, so they wanted to do where they traced out their hand and drew, pictures on their hand so they could create this circle and things like that. So there's one kid especially in it and things like that. And they says, "Oh no, we want you to trace your hand, draw a nice pattern on it and things like that." And on you go from there. He found this lovely piece of, colored paper and things like that. It was white on the front, and he turned it over, and there was a pattern on the back. Traced out his hand and cut that out. And they go, "Well, that's not what we wanted you to do." And he goes, "But this is the pattern I like." So, he threw some glitter on it and things like that. Again, so they were trying to be, trying to allow them to express their creativity and things like that. But he had just found essentially a quicker way of doing that and whatever. So, again, he wasn't driven necessarily by the outcome or anything like that. He had found what he liked, found a quicker way for doing it, and on he went and things. So that's, as you said, that's how it should be. Why schools we talk about that constraint-led learning and things like that. And as you said, that's just the industrial, essentially, society that they're in. They have to find a bell curve. They have to find the bell curve. So for that, then there has to be measures, there has to be outcomes and things like that. And again, there's fantastic teachers in Australia. I'm sure there is in the UK and things like that. But again, because of what they're in, because it's measured, then they have to work towards those outcomes and things like that. So it's hard. But again, that's why it's not a band-aid. It's not a pain stroke. It's not anything like that. It's just qualities that you're trying to instill into, kids, young adults as well. And right through.
You can't use band-aid training interventions and expect that to then have any kind of impact whatsoever. Hey, listen, we're an hour and 50 minutes in. And my little boy, who's off school because he got stung by a wasp in his eyelid yesterday, just came.
Holy ghost!
Poked his. Yeah, he looks like he's been 5 rounds with some boxer. I did say to him he should go to school today because he's not in school. And because he would have missed sports day as well. But I did say he should go in and just say, what you should see what the other guy looks like. But he's not keen on going in with his big puffy eye. So anyway, he's just come in and made the image of say, "What about lunch?" So anyway,
yes.
I better go and feed him. Anyway, listen, it's been great to chat to you. I'm glad we could do it. I know it's taken us a bit too long. Keep doing the amazing work you're doing with the blog. There's some great. You're pumping out some great content. And
thank you very much.
And it's definitely, I'll keep sharing it as much as I can. Just as a reminder for people, I know we mentioned it at the start, but where can they find you? And if they wanted to reach out to you on Twitter or wherever, if they wanted to get in touch, how could they do so?
Yeah, Twitter's @coachingcoach_. But yeah, email's the best way. Jonny@coachingthecoaches.net. Again, as you can tell, I love talking about coaching, age grade, especially rugby and things like that. But yeah, doing a bit of work with, soccer and swimming at the moment as well. So pushing myself into my uncomfortable zone just to see, again, just trying to create these environments and stuff like that. So for ultimately better coaching in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, wherever. So yeah, appreciate the chat very much.
Thanks for talking to me.
No worries.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. Great conversation with Jonny there. Really appreciate him taking the time to have a conversation with me. There's so much in there. Love his research, love the work he's doing, love the way he's trying to sort of share that with others and help people to consider things through the blog and through some of his other coach development work as well. 3 big takeaways was the disconnect between what the coaches believe was important for the players and what the players considered to be important for them, and that is an absolute... It's a central pillar, I think, to this dynamic around player-centeredness. Another big takeaway, something he said was, we've taken the game out of sport and left in the outcome. So, we've taken some of the central tenets of what is important about the sports experience, the game, the play, and we've actually just focused on just leaving it all about the outcome. And that's centrally moving players away from what is important and intrinsically valuable to them. This idea that if we're going to be there, we need to add value 100%. And then the final bit there really around this idea of the zone of proximal development grows out and up. So the idea of the kind of stretch, the idea of growth, we're growing out and we're growing up. We're not always in a linear development as we improve upwards. We're also improving outwards within our connected environment, within our teams, within our learning spaces. So much in there. I mean, they're just 3 or 4, but there's so much more to explore. But I really value that conversation with Jonny. It was really valuable. As always, if any of you want to get on board and join the intrepid band of learners that is the Conclave, there are some slots available. Head over to the website and click on the Become a Patron. You'll see the option to join. Come on board. We're getting together on next Monday, which is the 5th, and we'll be getting together 8 p.m. BST. And just a load of different people coming together to help each other solve these problems and to create our own zone of proximal development for each other. In the meantime, have a great week of coaching, and remember, ditch those drills.